All right, we are in a kind of a new series of teachings called The Human Experience. And what we're doing is we are attempting to explore how to be human, or what does it mean to be human. And last week we started this conversation, give you kind of a brief snapshot of where we're headed, because I want to kind of dip our toes into the shallow end of a little bit of what I want to go to today. But next week we'll floor it, like we'll take the deep dive, and then we're just going to keep rolling. But there's several conversations I want to have about what it means to be human, because to the best of our knowledge, the best of my knowledge, the best of my conscious knowledge, and yours as well, likely, this is the first time we've had this experience together. There are some people that would argue, actually, this is our 9th or 10th time. I don't know that, all right? What I can tell you is, for me, consciously speaking, I don't think I've ever been me before. I haven't had any knowledge that I have been me before, which is actually really disheartening. I told Katie the other day, I said, wouldn't it be amazing if when we died, all of a sudden I find myself like I did when I was born, which was totally unconscious, and then my earliest memories was like sitting in a kindergarten class or a first grade class, and how amazing would it be in first grade to be sitting there going, oh my, and everything come back to you about your previous life. How amazing would that be, right? Because you imagine, like, oh my God, it's going to be amazing. I'm going to meet a woman, her name is Katie, we're going to fall in love, this is good stuff, right? But to my knowledge, I'm 43 now. That hasn't happened yet. That has not happened yet. Now, sometimes I have moments of what they call deja vu, like, I feel like this has happened before. You know what I'm talking about? But largely, I have no conscious memory of this experience. So I can only stake the claim on a rational belief that this is the first time I've been me, and this is the first time you have been you, and this is the first time, check this out, that we have been human, and it's the first time we've been here together. So we're all experiencing a first. None of us have been us before. So when you make a mistake as a human, I want to remind you, go easy on yourself. This is your first time, all right? So when we talk about the human experience, what I find really interesting is that we've had these experiences, we're here, we're born, and we're having this experience, and no one left us any manual. Like I wasn't like I was born, and instead of like no one in first grade, they taught me they started teaching me mathematics, to which 95% of which I have never had to use a day in my life, all right? But they taught me mathematics, but no one ever sat me down and go, okay, like, let's talk about what it means to be human, right? No one did. There's no manual. And so the question is, well, what is this experience we're having? Like, I know for some of you, this is a bit like irrational and maybe a bit like, I don't know, a little too existential. But God, we need an education on what it means to be human. We're here. So what is this experience we're having? And what does it mean to be human? And how can we be human? And so those are some of the questions. So we're like talking about all kinds of things. We're talking a little bit about our bodies, like materiality. So blood, sweat, trees, wine, all like the actual tactile, physical things that are in this experience that we're having right now. We're talking about that materiality, but we're also talking about spirituality and maybe what is behind or inside or around, or the things we can't see. And we're kind of pushing those things together. And we are just discussing all kinds of things: our bodies, which is materiality; our hearts, which isn't necessarily materiality; our souls. You've heard that word soul. Well, if I were to stop right now and say, well, explain to me, what is a soul? What's a hard definition, right? What is a soul? Is it invisible? Is it something you can like see? If we took a scan of your body, we'd be like, oh, there it is. Check it out. You have the organ, which is the soul, and then right underneath there, or the heart, when you're right underneath there, the soul, right? Like, can it be seen? What is the soul? What do we mean by that language? And you hear people say, oh, they've got a great spirit about them. What is that? What do we mean by spirit? I love how we're just here and we're using these words, and I don't even know that we know what we're saying when we use them. We're like, oh yeah, it's just a spirit. It's just their spirit. They got a good spirit. What? I'm sorry, what? So they have a ghost in them? It's Casper, and he's decent, all right? Like, what do you mean spirit? I don't understand what you mean. What do you mean soul? What is that? What is a soul? What is the shape of a soul? What does that actually look like? So we're talking about bodies, hearts, souls, spirits, essence, which is what I want to talk about today. Who are we? Who are you? Consciousness. There's a big word. We've heard that float around. What does that mean? How do we define that? We should talk about time. Are we stuck in this time frame, this space-time continuum right now? Are we shackled to time? Because it sure feels like we are. Or maybe time is like a social construct that we created to help ourselves. So the question is, are we inside of time, or here's where we'll go 3 or 4 weeks, or is time inside of us? All right? Now, I know if you're here and you're like, this is weird. It's going to get so weird. But I'm going to land the plane where hopefully we all get it and understand it, all right? Well, when you talk about emotions, are they good? Are there good emotions or bad emotions? And should we even be judging emotions as good or bad? Just this week, I was reminded of the importance of emotional maturity. Our previous leader of the free world literally tweeted, "I hate Taylor Swift!" ! Now, hang with me. I'm going to be as non-judgmental as my soul can possibly be in this moment. But that is the definition of emotional immaturity. Are we okay? I'm not telling you, I don't have to tell you who to vote for. Okay, people ask me all the time, like, do you tell your people who to vote for? No, because they're educated humans, all right? They can decide on their own, all right? This has nothing to do with that. What I am telling you is, I saw it, I took a snapshot of it, I went, that's it. That is why we need a conversation about emotional maturity, because we have grown, quote, men who don't even know what to do with their emotions. Do we trust them? Do we not trust them? Are they reliable? Are they not reliable? Yeah. All that's in like 7 weeks. I hope you come back. All right. We talk about complexity, because we are very complex people. Very complex people. Just the other day, I was at a Mexican restaurant eating, and a transgendered individual came in, and they had a shirt on that says, "I'm voting for the felon," and had a gun in their holster. And I thought, wow, there's some layers. Do you know what I'm talking about? I thought, wow, now that's a person I want to sit down with and go, please explain, right? I mean, is anyone else confused at the world we live in right now? Because sometimes I look at people and go, this makes no absolute sense. I do not understand this. I don't understand it. Like, wait, hold on. So is it just uneducation, or are we missing? There are levels of contradictions miles deep within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And what I find really fascinating is the Republicans point out the contradictions in the Democratic Party, and then vice versa, and then it creates this divide further and further and further apart. And I'm sitting there thinking, guys, I don't know if you know this, but all of us have layers a mile deep of contradictions. What if instead of pointing out everyone else's, what if we just paused and we're like, I should probably start working on my own? Because I don't care who you are. Be the most marginalized human on the planet, you also have contradictions. And so what if we started working on our own? I know. Isn't this great? Are you having fun already? Because I am, okay? Oh, let's talk about paradox. Y'all know what a paradox is? We're going to have a conversation about paradoxes. We need to talk about paradox because there are so many paradox of what it means to be a human. Like, we need to have those conversations. Suffering and pain, that's a part of the human experience, isn't it? Why is there evil in the world? And how do we know what's evil? How do we define what's evil? And why is there suffering? And do we have to experience suffering? What about pain? Where did all that come from? And if God is good, why would there be any of that? Yeah. And then we'll talk about our shared common good. If we're going to have a human experience, let's do it together. That's called politics. All right. So we'll talk about that. Meaning, energy, materiality, spirituality. We'll talk about. Now, today, what I want to do is let's just put our toes in a little bit of the water. I am not even going to get close to what I'm getting at today. So if you do leave a little bit like, I'm just not sure if I understand, it's okay, all right? This is like the introduction, and then we'll wade into what I want to show you next week in like greater detail. Now, I mentioned all of that to you to say this. What I'm about to talk about this Sunday and next Sunday, it is what a lot of philosophers and scholars have said, like it is the awakening that's happening right now. And it has the potential, if we get it, and I'm going to use that in quotes, it has the potential to revolutionize the entire world. I'm talking like Copernicus level revolution, all right? Wait a minute. Wait, the sun revolves around the earth, or the earth revolves around the sun? Yes, that level of revolution. And you start to hear more and more people talking about it and trying to give language to it. And this is what I hope I can kind of steer us toward, that maybe you can have your own experience with it. Because when you see it, even if you just got a glimpse of it, and I would argue, even if you don't experience it, but you get a cognitive insight of it, so if you could cognitively even, like on some level go, I think I understand what he's saying, even if you could get that, as you will see, the implications of even that, game changer. Game changer for the human experience. Game changer for the human species, period. And so that's my hope. Even if we get it just on a cognitive level, man, that can change everything. Because I can tell you it certainly has for me. So here's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about our essence today, all right? I want to ask this big question that you've heard 1,000 times and that you might say is trite, and you might be of age now where you're like, I wrestled with that when I was a kid. I don't really think about that much anymore. But here's the question. Who am I? All right? Who are you? All right? And I want to go a little bit deeper into that question, not just who am I, but who is the I that is asking, who am I? Okay? You know what I'm saying? Who is the I behind the question, who am I? Now, this is a question that's, you when you hear it, you're kind of like, oh, that's like early 20s, maybe. You just graduated high school and you go out to the woods and you take some edibles and you stand behind the clouds and you look up and you're like, I found myself. You know what I'm talking about? And then you come back and you're like, I'm going to be in a rock band. That's me. And then you quit college and you go on tour and then very quickly, like after the first leg of the tour, you're like, that's not me. There's no money. I can't, you know what I mean? Like you know the story. It's like you can, and even like when I hear the question, sometimes it leads me a little bit into like the hippie-ish movement and world where we're walking around with like Volkswagen vans and they all did shrooms and they're just like, who are we? Right? Like there's all kind of that level of it. But because so many of you here and you're probably like, yeah, I've walked through that and I'm pretty confident in who I am. Like that's what I love. Most of you, I mean, you have like master's degree stuff. You're all in here like, yeah, I mean, come on, Cody. Like we're going to talk about identity. Like I think I'm good. I think I know at this age, if I don't know who I am now, then we're probably in trouble. Like I think I know who I am. And I would say, I do think we've all done a pretty decent job of kind of discovering our essence. But what I hope to show you is that there are like new levels that society, the human species, seems to be reaching right now with essence and identity. And so I want to get down in there the best I can and show you. And maybe here's the thought. Maybe you're not who you think you are. And maybe I'm not who I think I am. And maybe that is actually an amazing thing. Now, what I want to do is I want to attempt to uncover what some scholars have called true essence. Okay? I want to do my best in the next couple sessions to introduce you to you. Okay? And this is going to be a challenge. It's going to be a task because I want to give you a little spoiler here. Our essence, like who we really are, cannot actually be described or located because it is formless and infinite. So that's just a little peek of where we're headed. So if that's true, then you understand what I'm doing is an impossible task. I'm going to try to introduce you to you, but the you that I want to introduce you to can't actually be found and located. So I don't know what I'm doing up here, but all I'm going to try to do is point towards something and hope that you see it, taste it, experience it. Now, let me just start with this quote. This is from Desjardins said this. I love this. He said, it'll be on the screen, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Let's just pause there. If this is new for some of you, you're already looking at that going, oh, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, if you can just breathe that in, and I start there because the rational brain usually can take that one in. Like you can look at that quote and go, huh, that's interesting. At best, some of you already are layers deep going, oh, yeah, I think I get that. I think I get that. Okay? Now, what I want to do is try to unpack this quote. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Because if this quote is true, then check this out. This experience we're having right now, it's not, whatever it is not confined or limited to this. If we are, in fact, spiritual beings having a human experience, then that means perhaps there's never been a before and there'll never be an ending. It just turns out we're having this experience together. But maybe there's something invisible and infinite of who we actually are that actually continues to live on. Okay, so we'll unpack this. Now, to get at this, I want to go to a story in the Bible, and it's a story in the Old Testament, and it's written in Genesis chapter 32. So this story will be on the screen. If you grew up in church, you probably have heard this story. If you haven't grown up in church, you're probably like, well, what is this? This is like ancient wisdom at its finest. It's a story that's very enigmatic. It can be very confusing at first when you read it. Like, I have a lot of questions, but if you could sit at the edge of it a little bit and just kind of look at it and observe it, God, there are layers to this story that I have found that is so true to my own experience of finding this, like an answer to this question, who am I actually? Okay, so this is found in Genesis chapter 32. Now, let me give you a little backstory for those of you that didn't grow up in the church and you're not familiar. For those of you that went to Awana and you did Bible drills, you're going to be like, oh, snooze fest. All right, okay, just follow me here, all right? Genesis, the book of Genesis, first book in the Bible, chapter 12 through 50 is what is kind of called the ancestral narrative. These are etiological passages, which means this. They're just simply trying to give us explanation of how Israel got to where they are, okay? And so they kind of start from the beginning, and they kind of just run this whole history of who Israel is. So you probably know these three people. Abraham, right? Isaac, Jacob. Okay, so anytime you read like the biblical narrative, you've probably heard these phrases, the God of Abraham and Isaac, or the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You've probably heard that phrase, okay? Those are kind of the patriarchs of the Israelites. Abraham's kind of the father. Abraham has a son, Isaac, and then Isaac has a son, Jacob. Now, specifically in Genesis 25 through 32, Isaac, Abraham, Isaac marries a woman named Rebekah. And Rebekah and Isaac have two sons, okay? Can someone name those two sons for me? Did someone say Jesus? No, that is incorrect. Okay, anyone name those two sons for me? I mean, come on, we're master's program here. No? Okay, I got you. I'll help you. It's okay. Jacob and Esau. Have you heard of these two fellas, right? Isaac and Rebekah married Jacob and Esau. Now, in Genesis 25, you have this interesting little snippet of a story that when Rebekah was pregnant with Jacob and Esau, you basically have where Rebekah says, ooh, I feel something moving. And she's like pregnant with these twins, but the scripture says, I love this, that Jacob and Esau, it's not that they were just like moving. Like if you've ever been pregnant, you're like, whoa, what was that, right? No. It says that the reason there was movement is because Jacob and Esau were already fighting with each other, all right? So it's almost like they were both in there going, this is my space. No, this is my space. No, this is my space. And they have a wrestling match inside of Rebekah. And it's kind of the snippet we get. So already you're reading it going, well, what an interesting perspective. Yes, so you already know there's something going, there's like a sibling rivalry already that's already started, okay? Now it gets better. All right. In Genesis 25, after they've been born, Jacob gets so angry at Esau because it turns out when Rebekah had the two twins, Esau came first. All right. And in like the ancient Near East, the firstborn, it's always better to be the firstborn, right? Because the firstborn has all the blessings and all the rights and all the inheritance. So what do you have? You have Esau comes out, and then the text says that Jacob is holding on to Esau's ankle. I love the image. To me, and this is my little modern translation, it's almost like Esau comes out of the womb, and then Jacob's like, I'm getting that inheritance and blessing. It's trying to pull him back in, and they're just fighting for who gets the parental blessing, right? It's a beautiful story. All right. Jacob, they're born. Turns out Esau comes first, even though he's holding on his ankle. He couldn't pull him back in. They're born. And then as years go by, Jacob gets so angry that Esau's getting all the inheritance that he wants the birthright. So apparently Esau's out hunting. He comes back home. He's famished. He's like, God, I'm starving. And Jacob's like, I can make you food because I'm like a good chef. I'll make you food. I'll make you some stew. I'll give it to you. But here's the thing. In exchange for the birthright. So already you're starting to see this tension from in the womb, now outside of the womb, and all Jacob wants is the blessing from his parents. That's all he wants. God, I could stop there for days and just give a whole lecture, a whole series of teachings. How many of us have lived and are still living for affirmation from moms and dads that we never received? Oh my God, childhood wounds, fatherhood wounds, motherhood wounds. Oh my God, so many of us still working through therapy because our parents never said those words, I'm proud of you. Our parents never says those words like, oh my God, I believe in you, I love you. But it seemed like it was just filled with shame or absence. Yeah, it's kind of, you start to get the vibe of the story here. Fast forward a couple more chapters, Genesis 27. He doesn't get the birthright, apparently, because it doesn't talk anything else about it. So in Genesis 27, Isaac, who is Jacob and Esau's dad, apparently he's like, getting a little bit old. And his eyes were kind of getting dim, so he couldn't really see very well. And he says to Esau, I want you to go out and get me some food that I'm going to cook. And so Esau takes off. Well, it turns out Rebekah, Isaac's husband, says, I need to get my son in on this, because Jacob's my favorite, Esau isn't. By the way, if you're hearing you're a parent, there is actually, there's a verse in the Bible where it actually says, Rebekah's like, who's your favorite? Rebekah has no qualms about it. She's like, oh, I have a favorite child. It's Jacob. And so she's in on it too, and she's like, Jacob, you got to get that inheritance. You got to get that birthright because we don't want Esau to get it. And so Esau goes away, and apparently she says to Jacob, Jacob, I have heard from God, and he told me the plan for your life. And it is to get this blessing. So I need you to dress up like your brother, and I need you to talk like your brother, and I need you to go in there to your father and give him what he needs before he dies. That way the father can bless you and not Esau. And this is what happens. Jacob dresses up as Esau, and he steals the firstborn's blessing. Time passed, and now what we're about to read is he's on his way to reconcile with his brother. But he's terrified because he thinks Esau's going to want revenge on him. So this is the context, okay? Now let me read Genesis 32 here. That same night, he got up and took his 2 wives, okay? This is Jacob. His 2 maids and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. So he's on his way to meet his brother. He hasn't seen him in years. He stole the birthright, got the inheritance, but he feels like now is the right time to go make penance with his brother. But he's nervous that his brother's going to kill him, so he apparently has 2 wives now. And by the way, anybody in here that's like, talk to me about biblical marriage. Okay, he had 2 wives, okay? Apparently he had 2 wives, and he sends 2 wives off. He also had 2 maids, and then he also had 11 children. So this bro's been busy. You know what I'm talking about? So he's like, you know what? I better send them on, because if my brother wants revenge, I don't want him killing the whole family. So he sends them on, sends his livestock, sends everything he has, he owns, sends them on. And now, here's the scene. He's laying there, and he's like, I'll just go to bed, get a little energy, and then I'll wake up tomorrow and go meet my brother, and we'll see what happens. So he's all alone. No one's around him, and he lays his head down. Check this out. I love this. Verse 24, Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Okay, pause. Who is that man? It's very vague. Could Jacob be wrestling with himself? Could Jacob be wrestling with the divine? Could Jacob be wrestling with his own identity, with his own essence of who he actually is? When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, check this out, he struck him on the hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Oh, can I give you a little scholarly note? They use the English phrase on the hip. It actually would, the actual scholarship is inside the thigh. And some scholars argue that it was his actual, like, genitalia that the person he's wrestling with just, like actually hit. Okay? Now, let me just pause here. If you're a man, you know, first of all, two things. One, that hurts. Okay? We'll just say that. Two, you do not walk the same after you have been, okay? Three, I'll add a third one. What's really interesting about it is that is the actual, like, metaphor of identity, right? So follow the story. It's layers deep here. Like essence and identity for most people is boiled down to, well, what's your sex? Yeah. So already you start to see this. God, there's so much here. It's so deep, okay? Verse 26. So he strikes him, and then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." This is the man he's wrestling with. But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Boy, Jacob is selfish, isn't he? The man, he already cheated to get the blessing of his father, and it wasn't enough. And now he wants the blessing of whoever this man is. Like, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me, right? What's the deal with Jacob and this blessing? And so he said to him, I love this. This is what the man he's wrestling with said. "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." That's a monumental moment in the text. Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, or face of El, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life is preserved." Then the sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Okay, let's do this. I want to give you like two stages. That's it, just two little short stages that you have likely already experienced. I'm aware of that. The second stage you might be still in the throes of, and it's always good to be reminded of. But these two stages will lead us to what we'll get at next week, okay? So here's my premise. I want to give you my thesis of what I see when I read this story about Jacob and Esau. Here's my thesis. The thesis goes like this, okay? The story of Jacob is about how we are endlessly moving into greater degrees of clarity about who we actually are. I want to repeat that. This is my premise. The story of Jacob is about how we are endlessly moving into greater degrees of clarity about who we actually are. And I believe that's true for you, and I believe it's true for me. I believe this is true for all of the human species having the human experience. We are born, and as we grow, we evolve into greater degrees of clarity about who we are. The reason I know that is because if I asked any of you to pull up your photos on iPhoto, and I go back at least 20 years, 30 years, and I say, show me a photo of you, and I look at a photo of you now, and I know this statement's true, that your story is also a story about how you are endlessly moving into greater degrees of clarity about who you actually are. If I were to show you photos of my 19-year-old self, and you were to look at me right now, you would say, is that the same person? I'm telling you, I went through all of the stages. Have you? Did you go through a stage where you thought for certain that you would never look back on the photo and regret the hair choice? Yeah, most of you probably have, because you were certain in that moment. You're like, no, this is kind of timeless. Is it? Is it? Did you go through a phase where there was a particular brand of clothing or style of clothing that you wore that were like, yeah, this is me? And then now you get a little bit older and you look back and you're like, God, what actually was happening? I have photos. I went through lots of iterations of who I thought I was. My very first iteration was I wanted to be my father. I adored my father. I mean, hero level status. And so I did everything I needed to do to be my father. Early on, early teenage years, when people were like rebellion, not me, I got in line. 15, 16 years old, I asked my dad, I was like, can you take me to K&G suit store? Because I want what you're wearing. My dad was so proud. He's like, God, it's a true Christian. Come on, right? And he took me up to the K&G, and they had to find the smallest suit they could ever find. And they got it, and they put it on me, and it was still so big. It was like this olive color. It was so disgustingly gross, like this olive color. And it just hung on me, and my dad's like, you need a tie. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And he put a big tie on me, and it hung down like Trump's tie, way down. And it's just like, yes. And then my dad's like, well, because to me, I was like, I want to be my dad. So then I started preaching. Gave my first sermon when I was 16. The title of the first sermon was, What Time Is It? I still know the outline. Still know the outline to date. Had no clue what I was talking about, but the outline sounded so good. And in the world I grew up in, it was all about how sick your outline sounded. And the outline was like, what time is it? It's time for the truth to be known. It's time for the trumpets to sound. That was point 1. Point 2, time for the truth to be known. Point 3, time for the treasures to be shown. Boom! I got up, I preached the sermon, and I preached from the King James Version. Yeah. That's how I started, because it was the only sacred word, all right? And I got up and I did it, and I was and I would mimic my dad. I remember I would watch videos of him. My dad was a hollering preacher. He'd be like, God said, and I would just do, as a kid, my God, as a kid, and my parents would sit there and go, it's so good. And my dad was like, I've never heard a greater preacher, because you're a narcissist and I'm just like you, right? Like literally, this guy, no one can say it better. I'm like, right? Because I am you. And then I got older, and I remember when I first was like, I'm becoming my own man, and I took off the suit, and then I started wearing jeans, but then I didn't just go to any jeans. I went to skinny jeans, because I flew so far to the other side, I was like, I gotta be hipster now, so I flew over there, and I was like, forget the suit. I started mocking the suit, and I was like, put on the skinny jeans, and I was like, yes, and then that's who and then I grew my hair out, started using a flat iron. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh, yeah, talking like Justin Bieber-ish type stuff, like long hair, flat iron it out, and I became like the hip, cool student pastor, and for 10 years I traveled around, and that's what I did, and I was just like I wanted to be one of the band members, but I couldn't play an instrument, so I was like the speaker guy, and I went to all these festivals, and then got in the heart of CCM, and so all these bands were playing. You have like Jars of Clay, and then like Cody's going to speak. I'm like, oh, yeah, right, and that's just what I did, and then slowly I remember started pulling out of that phase, and I started meeting other speakers. And then I remember when Rob Bell came into my life, I was like, that guy, I was young, but I would look at him and I would follow his demeanor, and I would like the way he communicates, the way he speaks. Look at how he dresses. He used to fold his pants up. Those were things I noticed. And I remember when I started really liking him, he's had those like Numa videos, you know what I'm talking about? I was like, that guy, like he had bleached blonde, and I was like, what if I bleached my hair? I was like, no, there'd be too much like him. I got to be my own person, but yet kind of want to be like him. And so then I remember pulling up and meticulously rolling up my pants and just kind of trying to walk like him, I went through all of these phases, and I'm telling you that statement is true. As I have grown older, I'm growing to greater degrees of clarity about who I actually am. And this is what I believe is happening with Jacob. Now, I say all that to say, if I were just to give you 2 stages that you see in this man's life, they're very simple, and here it is, okay? Here's one. One is this. Typically, we start here when it comes to essence or finding our identity or finding the I behind the I. It's usually here. Who I am is who I am told I am. If you were to tell me, where does a person start with ego development? Right there. Your child typically becomes who they're told they are. Okay? And that's not a bad thing. In the world of psychology, that's just beautiful ego development. It's actually quite lovely, because we don't know how to construct our own systems, and so what we do is we rely and we lean on what other people say to us. And this is true for Jacob. I mean, think about it. In the story in Genesis 27, Isaac was old, his eyes were dim, he's about to die, and he calls Esau, his oldest brother, to go hunting and make him food, and he says he will bless him. Rebekah hears it and calls Jacob and says to Jacob, Jacob, I want you to do what I'm telling you to do. I mean, we have his mother, Rebekah, telling Jacob who he is before he ever even gets to make a decision himself about who he is. And his mother is saying to him, God spoke to me, and that's typically how it works. There's always God involved. God spoke to me and told me this is what you need to be, this is what you need to do. Now, let's just pause here. Have you ever experienced that in your life? When you were growing up, did you ever have a moment where you're like, that's the school I want to go to, and your parents said, Nope, God wants you to go to that school. And then you have to make a decision, and turns out the parents say, God wants you to go to that school so bad that if you want to go to that school, we're not paying, but if you go to that school, we'll pay. Yeah. Isn't it interesting how parents seem to have such a clear understanding of what God wants for someone else, but they can't seem to see it for themselves? This is kind of the story you have. Jacob's mom is like, I'm pretty clear on who you need to be. And then you have the story in Genesis 27 where Esau, he finally shows up. Jacob is disguised as Esau. He rolls up to his dad, Isaac, and Isaac asks this question. This verse actually be on the screen, Genesis 27, verse 18. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn son. Interesting. We have Jacob's first declaration about himself, pretending to be someone he's not. Isn't that interesting? The first declaration that Jacob ever makes about himself is a lie. He's trying to be something other than himself. His mom had special information from God that her youngest was meant to be ... you fill in the blank. And this is true for all of us. It seems we're all born with a narrative. We come into this human experience and we are given a name and a story, and we're told who we are. And for many of us, it just makes logical sense. What's the alternative? We're born, and all of a sudden people start just saying, your name is Cody, your name is, insert it, whatever it is. And you're a human, and you have skin, and this is what all of this is inside of us, and we're having this experience. And then it gets even meta level, because then they start shaping your worldview, right? And so you're conditioned in a particular way to think a particular way, and you don't know that at the time, but eventually when you start having other experiences outside of the experience that you were raised in, you start to realize, oh my God, there's what they call a cognitive dissonance between what you were raised to believe, see, feel, think, and then all of a sudden new experiences that you are having. Yeah, this is called growing up. And honestly, it's beautiful. I grew up in a very austere, Christian, evangelical, fundamentalist upbringing. You've heard me talk about it 1,000 times. Just this week I was reminded, do you guys remember the brand No Fear? Do you remember that? It was like a clothing brand, and then they had stickers. I remember in high school, that was the jam. Like people had shirts that had the little logo No Fear. And then I remember like rolling up to high school and I would see on the back of like my friend, he had like an S10, a Chevy S10, and on the back of it, it had that sticker that said "No Fear." Right? I thought about that brand this week because I'd forgotten about it. I think a lot about the older I get. I think about brands. Jinkos. Do you remember Jinkos? They had the big pockets and like Anyways, I wore those at one point. I thought about brands and I was like, No Fear. I was like, what an interesting brand. I do remember this. This caught my attention this week because I just hysterically started laughing because I was like, oh my God. I remember trying to buy a No Fear t-shirt, because usually No Fear and there's like some random quote on the back, you know what I'm talking about? And I was like, I wanted one so bad because everybody wore them, but my parents were like, we don't know about that brand. It seems kind of secular, you know what I'm talking about? So for my birthday, they bought me a t-shirt, and it was a knockoff version of No Fear, and instead of No Fear, it said Fear Not, and it had a Bible verse on the back, okay? Do you see why I was persecuted in high school? Not a knock on mom and dad. I swear, I am who I am because of it. But God, I do smile at you. All you have to. You have to start. If we don't start laughing about some of this stuff, it's not going to end well for us. I'm just saying to you, I grew up in this type of environment, and I remember my father said to me one time. He said, "We're going to go on a mission trip," and I was like, "A mission trip, right on," because that's what you did back then. You go on mission trips and you go to places where people lived in poverty and you take photos and you post it to make yourself look good. They call it missionary pornography. You know what I'm talking about? And so you would go, you'd find the most wretched place ever, and you'd get down with someone and you'd be like, look at what I'm doing for the world, right? And you snap the photo and you'd want everybody, and then you try to raise money for it and on and on. Okay, is everything good? Cutting a little deep, all right? I I remember my dad was like, go to the mission. I was like, okay. And boy, he didn't hold back. We went to a place called Hyderabad, India. I had never left my small town. And he's like, we're going to India. I'm like, oh, dear. And we get on a plane and we land. And the next thing I know, I'm in I think they call it like a toot-toot or something. It's like a little taxi. I got a luggage in the back and I'm with my dad. And I'm sitting in the middle of a square in Hyderabad, India, Bombay, Mumbai. And I'm just looking around and I'm like, oh, my God. And I just can't begin to even explain to you what was transpiring in my own little mind. I mean, explosions were happening. There were cars. I mean, first of all, there were no streets with like lights. Everyone just went where they wanted to go. And there's cutting through. And then like right in the midst would be like cows and then a car. And there were so many people my brain couldn't fathom it. And I just remember having these experiences going, wait a minute. There's like a cognitive dissonance. You all told me this, but now I'm starting to see this. And I couldn't put those together. I couldn't reconcile them. Yeah, that's actually how it works. And so as we begin to grow, this is what begins to happen. We begin to realize that we've been handed a framework, that this is how it's supposed to work. And then you have experiences outside of that framework, and it begins to disrupt everything you thought was actually true. Yes, that is not a bad thing. This is a beautiful thing. That's how we start. We start by people helping us create our own egos. They're helping us develop our egos. It's a good start. The problem with that type of ego development is not the ego development. The problem is when we don't grow past that ego development. Okay? This is a bit of the problem. Richard Rohr said it like this: temporary costumes are necessary to get us all started. The problem is when they stay around too long. So, if your kid has a temporary costume, right on. Hand them the temporary costume. The problem is when they're 43 and they still have the temporary costume. So here's what we do. We help them move on. Now, I got to hurry because I want to get back to the parenting. And all you people taking the parenting course, you'd run circles over me right now because you're so brilliant back there 2 weeks. Okay, so here we go. Here's what I'm here to tell you. Over time, you begin to realize, oh my God, I am not who people say I am. You are not who people say you are. You don't have to let others define you, label you, shame you, or limit you, or convince you that you are who they think you should be or who they say you actually are. That is a great way to start. But at some point as we evolve, we break away from that and realize, oh my God, very helpful. I'm just becoming something different than that. Yes. And here's what I would say is stage 2 with Jacob. It's like early on, we are who people say we are. And then here's stage 2. Who I am is who I think I am. Okay? Now I'm going to kind of end it here. All right? So here it is. We're told who we are, proper ego development. Then as we grow, there is a moment where we finally get somewhere and we're going, that's it. Now, just pause. You don't have to raise your hand. But most of you have probably had an experience where you finally kind of settled into your own skin. And you've gotten a little bit comfortable. And you're like, I don't think that anyone in here would be like, mastered it. Because you leave the door open. But you would say, I'm pretty confident in who I am. I think I know who I am. Yes. This is what's happening with Jacob. Now follow the story for just a second. Finally, after all these years, Jacob gets comfortable in his own skin. Jacob is beginning to own up to his true self. He's no longer pretending to be his brother. And notice what happens. All of a sudden, he has a moment where everyone and everything leaves him. He is alone. And he wrestles with a man that represents something, someone, God, the divine, himself, but it is a defining moment in his life. It is a night wrestling match. While he's trying to go to sleep, he's wrestling with the questions and demons and thoughts in his own psyche, and he's wrestling with them. You could say it's his dark night of the soul. It is an essential part of finding out who he actually is. And the moment he begins to get comfortable in his own skin, and he's like, I think I know who I finally am, everything's stripped from him, and all of a sudden he begins to question. And it's such a comical moment that the writers say, who are you? Whoever's wrestling with him says, who are you? Well, this has been the question since the beginning, isn't it? What did their dad say? Isaac, who are you? And what does he say? I'm Esau. Lie. We have the question again, who are you? You see the evolution, Jacob says, for the first time, recorded in the text, I am Jacob. Finally. I'm not knocking Jacob, but because everybody comes to themselves in their own time. There's no speed limit here of like, oh God, you have to certain age. No, everybody comes at their own time. Wonderful. Jacob is finally getting comfortable in his skin. And the moment he gets comfortable in his skin and he thinks he knows who he is the very moment alone by himself. The man he's wrestling with says, you think you're Jacob, but you're not. You're actually Israel. That is where I want to park with us. We think we know who we are, but then when everything's stripped away, perhaps that is actually who we are. So I have some thoughts here. Maybe Jacob is having a dark night moment. It is clear that the text says he's alone, but maybe that's like a metaphor for loss. It's the absence of something or someone. You know what Eckhart Tolle said, and I think this is so great? He said, death is a stripping away of all that is not you. You know, we're all headed toward death, and Eckhart Tolle says, death is a stripping away of all that is not you. The secret to life is to die before you die and find that there is actually no death. Are you okay? That's pretty deep. It's as if in this moment what Jacob is discovering is that he's having this human experience. And please hear me, no one is negating the human experience. And typically people that I meet that are rubbed raw with talks like this are usually because they're so attached to their human nature that it is actually proving the point of what we're trying to say. That when you get too attached to the human experience, this flesh and blood thing that we're seeing, all of a sudden when someone says, actually, you're not all that, there's more to you than what you are tasting, seeing, experiencing, there's more to. Typically, people that get frustrated is because they're too attached to that experience themselves, and what they could use is a little bit of detachment. Now, hear me. If you were here on week 1, we said it's all good. All good. So what I'm about to tell you does not negate your experience right now. All of you, wherever you're at, whatever experience you're having, whatever social intersection you sit at, I want to declare to you, it is good to be you. It's good to be you. So embrace who you are. It's good to be you. What I am trying to propose here is that the moment that we finally have figured out this is who I am is the very moment where the writers are like, you think that's who you are. But when everything's stripped away, the question remains then, well, who are you? So I want to give you some examples in closing, okay? Are we good so far? I'm just teeing it up, and then next week y'all take the bat and just crush it, all right? You are, as one writer said, being behind human. Now that may help you, okay, to get at what I'm getting at. You have human being. What if I were to tell you, you are the being behind the human, okay? That is your essence. That is who you are. What does that mean? Here's what that means. Let's talk about roles and functions for just a minute as examples. Mother, father, husband, wife, whatever role it is you play. All of that belongs to the human dimension, and it's good and it's sacred. Embrace it. Then there is the being, which is found in the still, alert presence of consciousness itself, which sits behind the roles and function. So human is form, being is formless, okay? Now, to try to land this, let me give you some examples. Let's talk about parenting for just a minute. If you're here and you have a child, you are considered a mom or a dad or a guardian or a parent or somebody, okay? That is, check this out, a role and function you play. It is really easy, like Jacob, to start believing that that role and function is actually your essence and identity. Are you following me, okay? It's really easy to say, well, who are you? And you go, oh, just a mom. Well, first of all, never use the word just. Second, you are actually a mom. That is a role and function you play. You are actually much deeper than a mom. Now, here's how we know this, okay? Follow me. Because there may come a day, God forbid, where your child is not there. And if you begin to assume you are what your role and function is, when that role and function disappears, it is an utter crisis because you lose a part of who you actually are. And some of you have experienced this, not as being a parent, but having parents. Eckhart Tolle said this, and I love this. He talked about when you get too attached and you mistake who you are for what you do. And that includes being a parent. So all I'm trying to do is help you detach a little bit here. He said this, parents cannot let go of being a parent even when the child grows into an adult. Can we stop there and preach sermons? Does anybody want to stand up and testify to this, okay? I'm sure you all probably have your own word here. Parents cannot let go of being a parent even when the child grows into an adult. My God, I can't even begin to tell you how many experiences I've had with this. I have to continue, and my parents know this. I'm not saying anything that I wouldn't say to them, and my in-laws know this. My wife and I have to continually remind our 60-something-year-old parents, hey, we're grown adults. I know. Seems like you should probably not have to say that, but maybe once. Why is it that we have to continually remind them? We're grown adults. We make our own decisions. I know. By the way, I give you permission. Some of you need to use a bit more boundaries. Please do. Please do. Parents cannot let go of being a parent even when their child goes into an adult. They can't let go of the need to be needed by their adult children. Boy, that's layers deep, isn't it? Because we could throw shame all day long at the parents, but you wonder if they're not coming from a place of love, but you also wonder if they're coming from a place of confusing their identity with their role and function. Parents define themselves by that role and are unconsciously afraid of loss of identity when they cease being parents. There it is. You feel that too, by the way? When you learn that, all of a sudden you have a sense of compassion for them. So you use boundaries, but you also have this heart of compassion going, oh, that's why they're doing this. If their desire to control or influence the actions of their adult children is thwarted, they will start to criticize, all in an unconscious attempt to preserve identity. Yep. Can I just give you a couple more? That's parenting. When you confuse your role and function with who you are, because you are not who you think you are, and I'm not who I think I am. We're going levels deep here, okay? I'll give you another example. Let's just take like material possessions for a minute. In many cases, people that purchase whatever brand, okay? Now, by the way, I'm not throwing shade, so just pause here, all right? If you're like a brand person, that's beautiful, okay? Like if that's your thing. Like sometimes Katie and I will travel, and depending on what part of the world we're in, some people, like whatever they're wearing, they want it for people to see it. Do you know what I'm talking about? They're like Gucci. They're like, he's rich. You know what I'm talking about? Like this kind of, you know what I mean? Like whatever, shoes, and people have a knack for it. In fact, and by the way, what I'm about to tell you, there's certainly like a beauty aesthetic level to it, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. Some of you are here and you just honestly, genuinely just love beauty and aesthetic, and that's your thing, and that's beautiful, wonderful. Like roll with it. So if that's your thing. But here's what I'm saying. In many cases, when you buy a brand, you are not buying a product, but you're buying an identity enhancer. Designer labels are primarily collective identities that you buy into. Expensive equals exclusive. If everybody could buy them, then they would lose their psychological value. You understand that? That's pretty deep. But if everybody could buy it, it would lose its value. Hence Cuban cigar, okay? I've had them. They're not great. Why are they so amazing? Because you can't get them, right? You turn up the heat on it. We've talked about this before. For when you're raising your kids, I don't give parenting advice, but I've made observations. And observation number one is when you're raising your kids, if you tell them do not have sex, do not have sex, do not have sex, it's dangerous, you better believe you just flared it up for them. And they're going to be like me as a kid with raging hormones going, I got to figure out what's behind door 3. Let's do this, right? Yeah. We have people that like buy material possessions equated having with being. I have, therefore I am. And the more I have, the more I am. That's why when I meet somebody who literally they come in and I'm like, fully confident in who they are and not wearing one designer label, I'm going, that person, that's who I want to get to know. What's the deal with them? Okay? Now, the pendulum swings. Because some of you are here and you're like, yes, get them, Pastor. I don't wear designer labels. I'm a minimalist. Okay? I'm coming at you now. Hold on, okay? Renunciation of possessions will not free you from false self. A mental image of yourself as someone who has grown and evolved and transcended all interest in material possessions and is therefore somehow superior than all others, is more spiritual than all others, is also a false role and function that you have attached to with identity. And dear Lord, have we met those people? I'm a spiritual person. I don't need cars. I don't need houses. I don't need nice things. I've just got God. If that isn't ego, I don't know what is. You have prided yourself on your superiority and your hyper-spirituality. And man, are we given a sermon right now. Yeah. There's just 2 more. Body. This is the big one for us. Body. For many people, their identity is intimately bound up with their physical strength, their sex, their good looks, their fitness, and their external appearance. Now, I want to pause here. I know I grew up in the church where the youth pastor got up and he's like, let me tell you about your identity in Christ. Oh, Jesus. And in many ways, it was negating people of color and their own experiences of suffering, and it's like, you're not that. And part of the problem with that is they move so far. It's like they became so attached to the formless. Does that make any sense? They became so attached to the formless that they lost their way. And this is why for many of us, you're having these own experiences where it feels like you're being erased. And that also goes back to our history. It's always fascinating to me how we never forget 9/11. It just happened every year. Never forget, never forget. And I'm also like, well, did we forget about the Trail of Tears? How come there's not an annual moment where we pause to say, hey, let's talk about all the Native Americans we slaughtered? Should we not never forget about that too? Man, and we're going to table after this. Just heating up, and then we'll just sit and have drinks and food. Like, how's everybody doing? For many people, their identity is intimately bound up with their physical strength, good looks, fitness, and external appearance. Here's the only problem with that. When you blend those together, guess what happens? I'm experiencing it for the first time. Maybe you are too. Oh my God, I would love to talk to you maybe next week. Have your own experience. I'm getting older. And I want to tell you something. I've heard people talk about this when they get in their 60s. They say, yeah, there's some a level of grief because you look in the mirror and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, it's not going to last. And I just noticed things are going this way. My body, I used to walk so upright. Now I have to be intentional because my body's just kind of like, oh God, life. You know what I'm talking about? Life. So frail. Look in the mirror. I'm like, look at these. Katie's like, yeah, they're called corn something. I'm like, oh my God. Crow, that's what it is. Corn, crow, it's all good. I'm like, what is this? She's like, we can help that. Look at these lines. I'm like, Alama, look at me. My God, what is becoming of me? Because you get older. And here's the thing. This is what Eckhart says, yeah, that's why the last final wrestling match like Jacob has with identity is when you die. Because you realize, oh my God, I'm actually not even this. That's what I want to talk about. Because if you attach too much to the human experience we're having right now, it's going to be hard when you die. But if you could detach and realize, oh my God, even this is going to go, and this is all I know, but there must be more, and all of a sudden you can even walk into death going, take it, it was never me to begin with. The last battle with identity is death. The formless dimension soul can more easily shine through when you die. Many people don't realize it until they're on their deathbed, and everything external falls away. And what they begin to realize is that nothing ever had anything to do with who they were in the first place. Friends, I'm here to tell you, you are not what you do. You are not who you think. You are not your thoughts. You are not your possessions. You are not all these labels you believe you are. You are not your roles and functions. You are not your personas that you have created. You are not even the body that you reside in. You are not who you think you are. You are neither of these things, and yet all of that is also a part of your experience. So I'll close with this quote from Rupert Spira. He said this: every night, you willingly and effortlessly let go of everyone and everything with whom you associate or identify and fall deeply asleep. Did you have that experience last night? I did. I took half a sleeping pill last night because I was pretty wired. I told Katie, I was like, I got a gig tomorrow, so I got to sleep. So, just helped myself, and I laid back. God, there's a moment where you lay there, and it's almost like if there's a way to be conscious of it, you can feel all the attachments just detaching. It's a beautiful thing. Every night you willingly and effortlessly let go of everyone and everything whom you have associated or identified, and you fall deeply asleep. In this experience of deep sleep, you are all alone. Everything that is not essentially you has been removed. And as a result, you experience the peace of your true nature. If letting go of everyone and everything were a traumatic or frightening experience, we would dread falling asleep at night. But we look forward to it, don't you? I already am right now. I am. I'm like, God, I can't wait. It single-handedly is my favorite thing to do on the planet, is sleep. Why do we look forward to it? Because it gives us access to the peace of our true nature. And this is why, friends, we use the phrase rest in peace. Yeah. Because there's no more wrestling with all the ways we thought we were something or someone. Yeah. So, Findings Lake, you aren't who you think you are. I'm not who I think I am. May you, today, may you begin the first step of detaching from all the roles and functions of who you thought you were. And all I'm asking is, may you be inquisitive, that there might actually be more to who you are than what you've experienced before.